The Winter Paralympic Games is an international multi-sport event where athletes with physical disabilities compete. This includes athletes with mobility disabilities, amputations, blindness, and cerebral palsy. The Winter Paralympic Games are held every 4 years directly following the Winter Olympic Games. The Winter Paralympics are also hosted by the city that hosted the Winter Olympics. The International Paralympic Committee oversees the Winter Paralympics. Medals are awarded in each event, with gold medals for first place, silver for second and bronze for third, following the tradition that the Olympic Games started in 1904. The Winter Paralympics began in 1976 in Örnsköldsvik, Sweden. Those games were the first Paralympics that featured athletes other than wheelchair athletes. The Games have expanded and grown to be part of the largest international sporting event after the Olympic Games. Given their expansion, the need for a very specific classification system has arisen. This system has also given rise to controversy and opened the door for cheating. Winter Paralympians have also been convicted of steroid use and other forms of cheating unique to Paralympic athletes, which has tainted the integrity of the Games. History. The origins of the Winter Paralympics are similar to the Summer Paralympics. Injured soldiers returning from World War II sought sports as an avenue to healing. Organized by Dr. Ludwig Gudman, sports competitions between British convalescent hospitals began in 1948 and continued until 1960, when a parallel Olympics was held in Rome after the 1960 Summer Olympics. Over 400 wheelchair athletes competed at the 1960 Paralympic Games, which became known as the first Paralympics. Sepp Zwicknagel, a pioneer of snow sports for disabled athletes, was a double-leg amputee Austrian skier who experimented skiing using prosthetics. His work helped pioneer technological advances for people with disabilities who wished to participate in winter sports. Advances were slow, and it was not until 1974 that the first official world ski competition for physically impaired athletes, featuring downhill and cross-country skiing, was held. The first Winter Paralympics were held in 1976 at Örnsköldsvik, Sweden from February 21 to 28. Alpine and Nordic skiing for amputees and visually impaired athletes were the main events, but ice sledge racing was included as a demonstration event. There were 198 participating athletes from 16 countries, and it was the first time athletes with impairments other than wheelchair athletes were permitted to compete. Starting in 1988, the Summer Paralympics were held in the same host city as the Summer Olympic Games. This was due to an agreement reached between the International Olympic Committee and the International Paralympic Committee. The 1992 Winter Paralympics were the first Winter Games to use the same facilities as the Winter Olympics. Cheating. Athletes have cheated by overrepresenting impairment to have a competitive advantage, and the use of performance-enhancing drugs. German skier Thomas Oelsner became the first Winter Paralympian to test positive for steroids in 2002. He had won 2 gold medals in the Alpine events but was stripped of his medals. One concern now facing Paralympic officials is the technique of boosting blood pressure, known as autonomic dysreflexia. The increase in blood pressure can improve performance by 15% and is most effective in the endurance sports such as cross-country skiing. To increase blood pressure, athletes will deliberately cause trauma to limbs below a spinal injury. This trauma can include breaking bones, strapping extremities in too tightly, and using high-pressured compression stockings. The injury is painless to the athlete but affects the body and impacts the athlete's blood pressure, as can techniques like allowing the bladder to overfill. Disability categories. The IPC has established 6 disability categories applying to both the Summer and Winter Paralympics. Athletes with one of these physical disabilities are able to compete in the Paralympics, though not every sport can allow for every disability category. Amputee. Athletes with a partial or total loss of at least one limb. Cerebral palsy. Athletes with non-progressive brain damage, for example cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, stroke, or similar disabilities affecting muscle control, balance, or coordination. Intellectual disability. Athletes with a significant impairment in intellectual functioning and associated limitations in adaptive behavior. Wheelchair. Athletes with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities which require them to compete in a wheelchair. Visually impaired. Athletes with vision impairment ranging from partial vision, sufficient to be judged legally blind, to total blindness. Les autres. Athletes with a physical disability that does not fall strictly under one of the other 5 categories, such as dwarfism, multiple sclerosis, or congenital deformities of the limbs such as that caused by thalidomide. Classifications. Within the 6 disability categories, the athletes still need to be divided according to the level of impairment. The classification systems differ from sport to sport. The systems are designed to open up Paralympic sports to as many athletes as possible, who can participate in fair competitions against athletes with similar levels of ability. The closest equivalents in able-bodied competitions are age classifications in junior sports and weight divisions in wrestling, boxing, and weightlifting. Classifications vary in accordance with the different skills required to perform the sport. The biggest challenge in the classification system is how to account for the wide variety and severity of disabilities. As a result, there will always be a range of impairment within a classification. What follows is a list of the Winter Paralympic sports and a general description of how they are classified. Alpine skiing. There are 2 events in alpine skiing, slalom and giant slalom. Alpine skiing accommodates athletes with the following physical limitations: spinal injury, cerebral palsy, amputation, les autres, and blindness, visual impairment. There are 11 classifications, 7 for standing athletes, 3 for sitting athletes, and 3 for visually impaired athletes. The divisions are defined by the degree of the athlete's function and the need for assistive equipment. Snowboard cross is technically now included in this category, though competition will take place with only limited classifications. Biathlon. Biathlon is a combination of cross-country skiing with target shooting. It requires physical stamina and accurate shooting. The events are open to athletes with physical disabilities and visual impairments. There are 15 classes in which athletes will be placed depending on the level of function. 12 divisions are for athletes with a physical impairment and 3 divisions are for athletes with a visual impairment. The athletes compete together and the finishing times are entered into a formula with the disability class to determine the athlete's overall finish order. Visually impaired athletes are able to compete through the use of acoustic signals. The signal intensity varies depending upon whether or not the athlete is on target. Cross-country skiing. Cross-country skiing, also known as Nordic skiing, is open to athletes with cerebral palsy, amputations, the need for a wheelchair, visual impairment and intellectual impairment. There are 15 classifications, 3 for visually impaired athletes, 9 for standing athletes and 3 for seated athletes. The divisions are determined in a similar fashion to alpine skiing, with attention given to the athlete's level of function and need for assistive devices. Ice sledge hockey. Ice sledge hockey is open only to male competitors with a physical disability in the lower part of the body. The game is played using international hockey rules with some modifications. Athletes sit on sledges with two blades that allow the puck to go beneath the sledge. They also use two sticks which have a spike end for pushing and a blade end for shooting. The athletes are classified into three groups. Group 1 is for athletes with no sitting balance or with major impairment in both upper and lower limbs. Group 2 is for athletes with some sitting balance and moderate impairment in their extremities, and athletes in Group 3 have good balance and mild impairment in their upper and lower limbs. Wheelchair curling. Wheelchair curling is a co-ed team event for athletes with permanent lower limb disabilities that require them to use a wheelchair in the daily lives. Athletes with cerebral palsy and multiple sclerosis can also play if they use a wheelchair. Delivery of the stone can be by hand release of the use of a pole. There are no classifications in this event except the requirement that all athletes participating must have need for a wheelchair for daily mobility. Para-snowboarding. On the 2nd of May 2012, the International Paralympic Committee officially sanctioned para-snowboarding as a medal event in the 2014 Winter Paralympic Games under alpine skiing. There will be men's and women's standing snowboard cross competitions. The IPC currently recognizes two broader sport classes, one for competitors with lower limb impairments and one for those with upper limb impairments. Visually impaired classes are not currently recognized, and the sport's debut in the 2014 Sochi Paralympics will feature events for only athletes with lower limb impairments, who will be permitted to wear a prosthesis. The events will be run in a time trial format, and results within each broad class calculated without factors that are just raw times based on disability classification. However, as the sport develops, the classes will be expanded and/or refined in the future. List of Paralympic sports. A number of different sports have been part of the Paralympic program at one point or another. This color indicates a discontinued sport. Winter Games.